One of the most painful aspects of being a creative individual is witnessing a major lack of creativity in the mainstream marketplace. Whether it's in movies, television, music, or novels, a consistent drought of good new ideas makes everyone feel dehydrated, be they consumer or creator. But when you're someone whose very passion is to make awesome new media and powerful immersive experiences, your thirst for something that fills a need on the consumer side nags at you a little bit more than most people. Based on a true story or based on real events types of films have appeared more and more often in recent years, and while they may not be entirely original due to having a real-world source, they're at least new stories for the screen. I'd rather take inspired by true events over a rehash or remake of an already successful film from several years ago. The Forest is one such example of a based on real-life story. Trailers for the film even advertise that as a major point by leading viewers to Google the suicide forest in Japan. And yes, the Aokigahara Forest is very real, with a long history of being the final resting place for lost souls. It's apparently very haunted considering how many hundreds of people have died in the woods. Seems like prime material for a horror film, doesn't it? Personally, I would agree with that. The Suicide Forest seems like a very rich playground for a horror movie. You could do plenty of work on the concept and make something good. Going in to see The Forest, I was hoping this would be the case, but there are two aspects of the film that betray its nature before you do see it. The very first is the release date, January. In the film industry, January is reserved as the dumping grounds for studios to unload projects they anticipate losing on. If the movie was shown at test screenings and the result was less than favorable, there's a good chance it will be put on ice in a winter month. February is known as a slightly more optimistic month, but still in the category of the graveyard for movies that are dead on arrival. After seeing The Forest was launching so early in January, there was already some writing on the wall, and it didn't say very nice things. The second sign was in the credits. The Forest is the directorial debut of Jason Zada, who has apparently had no prior experience within the film industry, having worked mainly on viral marketing campaigns for major companies. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing whatsoever. Extremely good directors can come from the shadows and introduce themselves without professional film backgrounds, as we've seen before and will undoubtedly see again. I firmly believe in the power of a creator to appear from the dark and blow everyone away without a professional background or formal education. Again, we've seen it happen way too many times to dismiss anyone for lack of a resume or degree. But when you realize there are 3 writers on board who made the script, which was given to an entirely untested debut director with a background in viral marketing, about a famous scary place everyone knows about due to internet articles and videos with trailers that say, hey, Google this true story, you should really Google it, you begin to wonder if things are going to be alright once you sit down in the theater. Still, the names for casting lead you to believe that the studio had legitimate confidence in the script, and the actors themselves may have shared that attitude. And beyond all of that, unless the paranormal activity tag stands in front of a film's title, I will always go into a film with a blank slate state of mind. Every time I purchase a ticket, I want to walk out of the theater smiling, come back to my lair, and tell everyone in a video review how awesome the movie was and that they need to see it. This is not one of those happy times. The premise is very simple in The Forest. Natalie Dormer's character, Sarah, is told that her twin sister Jess has gone into the suicide forest and hasn't come out. Sarah flies to Japan, where she meets a travel writer in the form of Taylor Kinney, and using Sarah's apparent psychic senses to guide them, they search for Jess in the woods. Now let's talk about that for a moment, the psychic connection that Sarah has with her sister Jess. In this movie, which is primarily a visual storytelling medium, we are told about the connection and only sometimes reminded of it by Sarah herself. Sarah informs Aiden, Taylor Kinney's character, that she has a sort of mental lifeline to her sister in the bar where they first meet, and we just have to take it on faith from there, with Sarah giving little quips later and catching slight moments of what I suppose are psychic hints throughout the film. And by throughout, I mean sparingly. Besides those moments of straight exposition we're supposed to just accept, there isn't a single instance that supports the concept. One of Sarah's nightmares can be misconstrued for a psychic moment, but really, it's just an excuse to have a tense and scary moment. And that's another sin committed in the writing. Constant abuse of nightmares and dream sequences that serve no purpose except to provide quick scares. And that tactic isn't even reserved solely for the nightmares either. The very first scare in this movie, and it pains me to say this, is the same exact type of car window jump scare we saw in A Christmas Horror Story. I wish I was kidding. Sarah is sitting in the back of her taxi, observing some Japanese women in cosplay, and an old man suddenly jumps in front of her window for no reason whatsoever. He pops right up in front of the glass, waves his hand while smiling, and then lumbers off after accosting this woman he doesn't even know. That is the very first scare in the movie, something that we saw in A Christmas Horror Story. Something entirely unlikely and contrived which has nothing to do with a haunted forest or psychic power. The next scare is once again pointless, having nothing at all to do with the premise of the film. Sarah is in her hotel and has to leave her room for whatever reason, but it's dark, so she turns on the lights. The lights are faulty, so they blink out and only one of them tries to struggle on, giving the hallway a dim strobe light effect every few seconds. Yup, you know exactly where this is headed, I know you do. Sarah starts making her way down the dark hall, only getting a little bit of strobe light every few feet, and at the end she can see the form of a woman. Sure enough, that woman turns into a jump scare that is quickly wrestled by an attending nurse. It's just an elderly woman with poor sight out in the hallway, who was used for a jump scare. Nothing to do with the suicide forest, or ghosts, or anything related to the plot. And even worse, when Sarah has a nightmare while staying in the forest, the old woman appears again in the same jump scare style. There isn't even a point. The woman didn't die in the forest, she's not related to Sarah or Jess, and she's still alive. Even if she was related somehow, she's not a ghost or possessed or anything. Why did they bring her back? That makes 2 strikes now against bad horror moves before we even enter the forest. The first major strike against filmmaking came in the first 10 minutes of the movie, shortly before the car window jump scare. Sarah is on her way over to Japan and then makes her way into the taxi, rolling through Tokyo. Meanwhile, the scene keeps jumping backward to show clips of her at home, learning about her sister, and then talking about the situation with her husband. We see a bit of what led up to this, then back to Sarah in Japan. Then back to the USA, then back to Japan. Every minute or so. It's very broken up, moving all too fast while just trying to get backstory in as quickly as possible in a way that makes it impossible to care. A single, unbroken run-through of Sarah's experience before departing to Japan would have actually given us an empathy base for her character, to know what's happening, how she's reacting, and how we should be feeling alongside her. Instead, we get quick shots of film that should have been parts of unbroken whole segments where character could have developed. This is a perfect example of how not to start a movie. From the very first scene, an audience should be brought into a situation designed to establish empathy with the main character. That shouldn't involve jarring leaps from past to present with no time to form empathy bonds and establish atmosphere. Instead of being brought alongside the journey with Sarah as she discovers her sister may have committed suicide and then being with her as she deals with it, we get outsider shots of the situation while the director keeps whipping us back and forth between 2 countries. And speaking of being whipped back and forth, let's talk about an extremely important aspect of film: cinematography. The defining trait of a movie is that it is a visual medium created with a camera, a tool that must be set up in the perfect way to present any given moment with an exact reason for doing it. The cinematography in The Forest is so poor, so terribly executed, that scenes you know for a fact are meant to be still shots are shaky. Sarah takes a moment early on while being shown in badly cut jumps between the United States and Japan to look at a photo of herself and her sister. The camera becomes focused in on the photo, allowing us to see it alongside her. And yet, the camera is still shaking. You can see it moving up and down, left and right as it attempts to record what is very obviously meant to be a still shot. Whenever Sarah walks, the camera chooses either a mediocre or downright poor place to situate itself. During instances of focusing on 2 characters having a conversation, you can detect the camera moving up and down on the shoulder of the cameraman as he's breathing. While recording movements without violent action at all, the camera whips around to track those movements, creating the same kind of blurred fistfight effect you can catch in several recent action movies. There is no thought whatsoever put into the use of the one major tool you use to shoot movies. And when most of the greatest horror films to ever exist are praised for their cinematography, failing to deliver in that regard 30 to 40 years later with superior technology and techniques just isn't acceptable. When a film from the 1980s can blow a 2016 release out of the water on camera work alone, you've got a major problem. The actors themselves were fine. They did well, which I expect of the names attached to this movie. Their characters, however, weren't written to nearly the extent they deserved, and the relationship Sarah has with her sister is almost non-existent for what we see of it, just like the proof of her psychic ability. For a movie about a woman flying all the way to Japan to find her sister in the suicide forest, we sure don't seem to explore the anguish and anxiety Sarah feels over the situation. So much opportunity could have been taken to make this a horror piece about siblings fighting the harshest possible odds for each other, but that wasn't done. I haven't even seen Disney's Frozen, and I know they pulled it off better than The Forest did. We don't feel close enough to Sarah, and we don't feel close enough to her sister, and that's a major issue in a movie that is entirely banking on the premise of two sisters whose bond is so deep, they have an actual psychic connection. By far, the one person in the film I felt the most for was the god who helped Sarah and Aiden, Taylor Kinney's character, through the woods. This one sudden extra who is there to kind of move the plot along had more character development and emotional attachment to myself than the actual main characters. The scares are minimal, quite a few don't even make sense, the Forest is barely utilized as a character like it should have been, opportunities for character development and empathy tie-downs were missed all around, evidence for plot devices are missing, and the very last scene in the movie is the same jump scare tactic from the end of Sinister and Sinister 2. I feel as if there were good moments for atmosphere much later on in the movie, and the actors were good, but the material they're given to work with is so limiting that their talent cannot shine. An interesting side plot with Taylor Kinney's character later in the movie got my hopes up and I was really glad for it, but those hopes were soon dashed. Some of that side plot provided tension I could get into in moments where you suddenly become invested in events, but interest quickly fades. Ultimately, this movie is exactly what any cynics who saw the trailer said it was going to be. An attempt to cash in on the viral power of an internet article. And to achieve the means to that end, they hired a viral marketing guru as the director. So much could have been done with this story. So much could have been done, in fact, that even between narrating this script and writing it, I kept coming back to all the missed opportunities. There was such potential to write a compelling tale, create characters we can feel, and bring a location to life. This could have been a truly gripping story about two sisters, one of whom is so damaged from a past trauma that she goes to the suicide forest in Japan, and her own sister flies across the United States and the ocean and Japan to just come and get her and rescue her because she loves her. But we don't see that. We don't see these two sisters defying the odds together in a haunted forest. In every aspect, the path to quality filmmaking was ignored in this movie. Character in this film receives a 5 out of 10. I know who everyone is, what they do, and what their motivations are. The actors work well with what they have, but they don't have much to work with. Nothing can really be awarded in this category beyond the very basic. Story gets a 4 out of 10. There's more to it than just Sarah looking for her sister, but so little was done to properly explore the relationship between the sisters, support the psychic connection, and really open up Aokigahara Forest as a location. Fear gets the same score, 4 out of 10. There are tense moments, but the end result of most are just terrible, and using false jump scares definitely hurts your score, especially when it's the very first kind of scare you give in the movie. I mean, seriously, come on, are you kidding? The car window, as your first scare in the movie, with a random passerby on the street. Style is 2 out of 10. The film looks like it was made in Japan, in a forest, but not the Aokigahara forest, not the haunted suicide forest. So much could have been done with this concept and so little actually showed through. And as for the cinematography, when you're shooting a still image, I expect it to be still, not slowly floating back and forth like the sniper rifle zoom in a video game. All they had to do was put it on some kind of tripod. You could have even stacked up some boxes if you wanted to. Instead, nope, let's allow the constant breathing movements of the cameraman to stay in every shot where it's obvious, sure, and include lots of blur and whipping movements as if this was an action movie. Enjoyment absolutely receives the same score, 2 out of 10. To be completely honest, I considered walking out halfway through the film, and that's something I never do. Only Sinister 2 got me close enough to even consider maybe doing that before, but I still had hope while watching it. When hope came to me in the forest, it was a complete surprise because I didn't expect to be given anything to invest myself in. And that leaves the final score as a 3.5 out of 10. They made a movie, basically, with competent actors and events you can follow. Nothing more can really be praised except for scratching the surface of tense moments done right during certain portions. As for the vision score, we'll keep the current theme going with a 2 out of 10. This was a movie, billed as a horror piece set in Japan, about an infamous and very haunted location where a woman with a psychic link to her sister goes to rescue her from suicide because she loves her, is challenged all along the way by malicious spirits and has untrustworthy travel companions to deal with, but it barely feels like attempts were made to deliver on all of those points. The Force continues to keep the movie industry tradition of bad releases in January. Meanwhile, I continue to keep tradition of enduring a movie I felt like walking out of. Really, guys, don't see The Forest. This is even more of an attempt to make a profit off of a viral internet topic than the inclusion of Krampus in A Christmas Horror Story, and it's not worth your money. But even if I didn't like the film, I hope that you at least enjoyed this review. Let me know by clicking the like button and feel free to leave a comment below. You can subscribe to catch my journey in attempting to see all the horror movies released this year, as well as in-depth analysis on web series and older movies and TV shows coming soon. Thanks for joining me in the dark again this evening. Feel free to join me anywhere, on any night in fact, as long as it's not in the forest. I'm Nick Nocturne, and I'll be seeing you again real soon. Sleep tight.